Chapter 1. Meeting in the Forest. Alice arrived in a small town in the south to spend her summer internship studying the local flora and fauna. She had never been to such places, quiet, remote from big cities. The air here was pure, and the sky seemed incredibly close. This town, hidden among green forests and mountains, attracted travelers with its pristine nature and peaceful atmosphere. But at night, when the stars lit up the land and the moon shimmered, casting light over the forest thickets, Alice couldn't resist the temptation. She went into the forest, hoping to find something new and unusual for her research. The forest was mysterious and silent, full of the sounds of nocturnal animals and rustling leaves. She walked further, feeling how her steps became softer on the soft earth. When her attention was drawn to movement between the trees, she stopped and listened. The snapping of branches, the crackling of leaves, and then a sharp growl. In the next moment, a giant wolf appeared from the dark depths of the forest. It was enormous, its fur thick and dark, and its eyes bright, like two flames staring directly at her. The wolf's gaze was cold and mystical. Alice froze, her heart racing. The wolf did not attack. It stood before her, sizing her up. Alice felt her body tense, but she did not retreat. The wolf approached closer, but at the last moment, when its massive teeth could have torn her apart, it suddenly jumped back, growling loudly. But not at her, at other beasts that suddenly sprang out of the darkness. Alice barely caught her breath, watching as the wolf fought. It leaped powerfully and swiftly, tearing apart creatures she couldn't identify. Soon, everything went silent. The wolf turned back to her, and as if ensuring she was safe, it turned and disappeared into the shadows of the forest. Alice's heart was pounding so hard that she could feel the air growing heavy around her. What was that? Who was this wolf? Why did it save her? Then, after a few seconds, silence descended over the forest, and Alice felt that her life had just changed. But what was she supposed to do with this feeling? Chapter 2. Secret Gazes. The next day, Alice returned to the town, too afraid to tell anyone about her nighttime encounter. Her thoughts were in disarray, and every attempt to explain what had happened seemed foolish. But she couldn't forget the wolf's golden eyes and that strange moment when it retreated and saved her. That evening, while walking through the town square, she unexpectedly met him again. But this time he was a man, tall, with dark hair neatly combed back. His features were sharp, but attractive. His eyes, just as golden as the wolf's, made Alice's heart race. Hello, his voice was low, a bit hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken for days. He stood a few steps away from her, as if he, too, felt something. Alice froze in place, not knowing how to react. She knew she couldn't just walk past him. She trailed off, her thoughts tangled, and she could barely get the words out. You were there in the forest last night. He didn't respond immediately, just looked at her closely, as if studying her reaction. His gaze was both familiar and strange. You want to say you remember me? He finally spoke, his voice not showing surprise, but with some underlying tension. Alice nodded, trying to hide her confused feelings. I don't understand. What was that? Why didn't you attack me? His lips pressed slightly together, and he took a step forward. Alice instinctively stepped back, her heart uneasy. Sometimes we, humans, become what we don't want to be, he said, and his voice carried a certain weight. Otherwise, you wouldn't be standing here. Alice didn't know how to respond. It was so strange, so frightening. She felt like she had to react somehow, but the words wouldn't come. Aren't you afraid of me? His gaze intensified, and Alice felt her soul fill with unease. Why didn't he want to scare her? What was he hiding? She couldn't understand, but everything in her body told her that this man was not as simple as he seemed. I don't know. she answered softly. But I need to understand what's going on. Who are you really? His eyes briefly turned cold as ice. But then they softened, and he quietly said, "My life is more than you can imagine, Alice. And you are too close to learning the truth." She felt the blood drain from her face. These words echoed in her mind, like a forewarning of something she couldn't avoid. "You're scaring me," she whispered, but felt something stir in her chest. Her desire to know the truth was growing stronger, despite her fear. He said nothing more, simply looked at her silently, and in his gaze, there was a shadow she couldn't understand. "We will meet again, Alice," he said finally, turning to disappear into the darkness. Alice remained standing, unable to move. Fear and the desire to know the truth fought in her heart, but one thing was clear. This man was connected to her fate, and there was no turning back now. Chapter 3. Revelation. The next morning, Alice couldn't shake the thoughts of what had happened in the square. His golden eyes kept haunting her, and she felt an unexplainable pull to learn more, though fear of what she might uncover held her back. Leon was not just a man. That feeling wouldn't let her go. She walked through the forest, mulling over Leon's strange words, when she ran into Lucia, her study companion. Lucia was the embodiment of sharp intellect, always eager to solve mysteries, but when it came to Leon, her gaze turned wary. "Alice, you look troubled," she said, approaching her friend. "Are you feeling unwell?" Alice nervously shook her head, trying to hide the anxiety in her eyes. "No, I'm fine," she replied. "It's just, I met someone, and it's all so strange." Lucia raised an eyebrow. "Who did you meet?" Alice hesitated. She couldn't reveal everything. A few words could betray too much, and she wasn't ready for that. "Just someone who looked at me in a strange way," she said, trying to sound convincing. Lucia pursed her lips but didn't press further. "All right, but you're okay, right? You didn't forget you have to submit your report today?" Lucia reminded her, giving Alice a much-needed distraction from her uneasy thoughts. Throughout the day, Alice couldn't stop thinking about Leon, his words, his wounds that healed too quickly. He was hiding something, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she had unknowingly become part of something much bigger than she understood. When she met him again that evening, the fear was gone. He stood in his usual form, a man, with those same golden eyes, but something about his gaze was different. He seemed distant, yet so close that Alice couldn't look away. "You're here again," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Alice stepped forward, feeling her heart pound faster. Who are you?" She finally dared to ask the question that had been tormenting her. "Are you human? Or something else?" Leon looked at her in silence for a moment. He sighed, as if he had expected this, but still wasn't sure how to begin. "I'm not human," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I am a werewolf." Alice froze. It was too much. She had read such stories in books, but to hear it as a fact, as something real. You're not joking?" she whispered. Leon nodded, his gaze serious. "No. I am a real werewolf. I wasn't supposed to reveal this to you, but you've already seen too much. You were there in the forest. You saw me." Alice felt fear creeping into her heart, but at the same time, there was something in his words that kept her from stepping back. She didn't know what to do with this information, but she couldn't just walk away. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible, filled with desperation, as if trying to understand why she had been drawn into this world. Leon took her hand. His touch was gentle but firm. "You can't understand everything at once. It's far more complicated. But one thing is certain. You didn't come into my life by accident. Your life will change, too." Alice felt her world shattering, yet at the same time, something new, something powerful was stirring within her. She knew she couldn't just step aside. Something in her blood responded to his words, and she knew the time to make a choice was near. "And now what?" she asked, not knowing what to expect but determined to see this through. Leon looked at her, his golden eyes glowing in the darkness. "Now, you must decide whether you want to be part of this world with us. Otherwise, it will be dangerous for you." Alice realized that her life would never be the same. Chapter 4. Danger in the Forest. Night had fallen over the forest again, and Alice couldn't sleep. Thoughts of Leon, his revelation, and what lay ahead tormented her. She understood her life would never be the same, but if she accepted this world, what would become of her? She had no answers. Questions tangled in her mind. Why her? What connected him to her? And most importantly, how was all this related to the terrifying wolves she had seen that night? Was Leon the only one carrying this dark secret? The questions kept piling up, but the answers remained elusive. The next day, after a restless morning, Alice ventured into the forest, hoping to find some clarity. She needed to understand the world she had been drawn into. But no matter how much she tried, thoughts of werewolves wouldn't leave her. As she wandered deeper, a sudden rustling in the bushes made her freeze. She listened carefully. The sound grew louder, and she felt her heart clench. Then, from behind the trees, a massive wolf emerged, its golden eyes glowing. It stood still, watching her, as if assessing her. Alice tried not to move, though it was clear that her fear was impossible to hide. This was the same wolf that had saved her nights ago. "You're here again," she whispered. The wolf didn't respond. Instead, it stepped forward, and Alice's tension grew. Then, before her eyes, the wolf was gone. Leon stood in its place. He was in human form, but his golden eyes still shone, his expression tense and serious. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You don't know how dangerous this place is." Alice felt her nerves fraying, but she couldn't back away. She stepped closer, needing answers. "What's going on? Why are you saying that?" Leon grabbed her hand, pulling her into the shadows of the trees. "It's not safe here. You should know everything I know. But if you want to be with us, with the werewolves, you must understand that the pack isn't always so welcoming." Alice couldn't hide her surprise. "The pack? You mean there are others like you?" Leon nodded, his expression growing darker. "It's more than you think. We're not just hunters. We are family. But sometimes, to survive, we fight among ourselves. We are divided. Some stand by me, but others are willing to kill for power." At that moment, a distant howl cut through the silence, and Alice's heart pounded faster. Leon flinched and turned in the direction of the sound. "They're here," he said, his voice rough. "The others. They've come for me." Alice felt the ground beneath her tremble. The next second, shadows emerged from the trees, other wolves. Their eyes gleamed golden like Leon's, but their aggression was undeniable. "You can't keep her, Leon," one of them said, stepping forward. His voice was hard, threatening. "She's not one of us." Alice saw Leon freeze for a moment, then step in front of her, shielding her from the approaching wolves. "She stays with me, and you won't touch her unless you want to fight," he declared, his face set with determination. A heavy silence fell, but the tension was thick in the air. The wolves exchanged glances before the elder among them took a step back. "You'll regret this, Leon. You're weak. She doesn't know what she's getting into, and when she realizes, it will be too late." As if on cue, the wolves vanished into the forest, leaving only silence and unease behind. Alice stood still, trying to process what had just happened, feeling the blood in her veins turn cold. "You're in danger," Leon said, turning to her. "You and I. But you must understand, if you choose to be part of this world, there's no easy path. In our pack, there's no place for the weak." Alice didn't know what to say. but her resolve had already begun to form. She knew she couldn't just walk away now. This fight had become her own. "I'm ready," she said quietly but firmly. Leon looked at her, a mix of gratitude and concern in his eyes. "Then hold on tight. This is only the beginning." Chapter 5. Call of Blood. The next morning, Alice woke up feeling like the night had brought no rest. Leon's words still echoed in her mind. "You're in danger. You need to understand this isn't just a game." She sat on the edge of her bed, trying to process everything that had happened. It all felt so unreal, like a terrible dream. But it wasn't a dream. Leon, his golden eyes, the wolves, it was all real. She understood that her life had changed forever, and returning to normal was impossible. But what now? What was she supposed to do with everything she had learned about Leon, the pack, and the world she was now meant to accept? Leon's words kept replaying in her mind. The way he had said she was his true mate haunted her. What did that even mean? And why her? She was just an ordinary girl. How had she ended up at the center of all this? Her heart pounded faster every time she thought of him. The connection between them was so intense that she doubted she could ever break free from it, even if she wanted to. When she stepped outside, she saw Leon standing at the edge of the forest. He was as enigmatic as ever, but there was something new in his gaze: anxiety, tension. Alice approached him, trying not to appear too nervous. "You're here," she said, masking her unease. Leon turned to her as if he had known she was coming. He nodded slightly. "You want to know more? Are you ready?" His voice was quiet, yet there was a subtle warning in it. Alice felt her breath hitch. She couldn't believe she was about to step deeper into this world, but there was something about him that compelled her forward, despite all the dangers. "I'm ready," she said with determination. "I want to understand. I want to know why you said I'm your mate." Leon took a step closer, his golden eyes piercing through her as if he were searching her soul. They shimmered with an intensity that made Alice's heart race. "It's not just words, Alice. I feel it. You're not a coincidence. You're my true mate, as strange as it may seem. We are bound by blood, but not just blood. It's not simply magic or fate. It's something deeper, something that comes from within. We are one." Alice felt lightheaded. She wanted to understand, but it was all too much. Her world had turned upside down, and she couldn't adjust to this new reality. "I don't know what to do with this, Leon," she whispered. "It's too much for me. I can't just accept this world and become a part of it. I'm not ready." Leon's eyes darkened with pain for a brief moment, and she felt as if he was losing a piece of himself. But he didn't back down. "You don't have to be ready, Alice. But if you want to be with me, you must accept this world. That's a choice only you can make." At that moment, something stirred inside her. A warmth spread through her chest, as if her soul was responding to his words. She couldn't explain it, but she felt drawn to him, to this world, like this was something she had been searching for her whole life. Suddenly, Leon reached out, his hand brushing against her cheek with a gentle touch. "Do you feel it?" he asked, his voice softer now. "This isn't just emotion. This is our bond, and it's stronger than you think." Alice closed her eyes, feeling his touch seep deeper into her being. Her body responded as if every fiber of her existence recognized him. I feel it," she whispered, opening her eyes and meeting his gaze. Leon smiled, but it wasn't a joyful smile. It was filled with sorrow and regret. "This won't be easy, Alice. The pack won't accept you easily, and our enemies won't leave us alone. You must be prepared. Our path won't be an easy one." Alice nodded, feeling a newfound determination settle in her chest. She couldn't turn back now. This was her path, and she was ready to walk it, no matter the dangers. "I'm ready," she said, more confident than ever. Leon looked at her again, pride and recognition flickering in his golden eyes. He knew this moment would change everything, and despite the dangers ahead, they were now bound not only by blood but by fate itself. Chapter 6. A battle with herself. Alice couldn't escape the thoughts that had consumed her since she met Leon. He had said she was his true mate. He had told her that her fate was now tied to his. And no matter how much she tried to push the thought away, the pull she felt toward him was only growing stronger. Days passed, and though she tried to return to her normal life, everything felt different. Everything around her reminded her of Leon, his piercing eyes, his words, the danger lurking in the forest, in his world. But more than anything, it was her own feelings. She felt an unrelenting pull toward him, something far greater than mere attachment. It was an unbearable longing she couldn't ignore. That evening, she found herself once again at the edge of the forest where she had first met Leon. Her soul was in turmoil. She stared into the dark abyss stretching before her, feeling the wolves awakening for their evening hunt. They were there, somewhere in the shadows, their presence thick in the air, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Alice wasn't sure what she was supposed to do. She felt drawn to this world, yet it terrified her. She couldn't understand what she was supposed to choose. Leon was near, but his world was one of danger and struggle. He had warned her that her life in this world would always be at risk, and she understood that. But for some reason, the more she resisted, the stronger the pull became. Suddenly, Leon stepped out of the darkness. His presence was like a thunderclap in the silence, his figure emerging against the backdrop of the night. Alice's heart pounded wildly. "You're here," he said, as if he had known she would be. Alice clenched her fists, trying to gather her thoughts. "I don't know what to do." Her voice trembled. "I don't know what this means, Leon. It's too much for me." He stepped closer, his gaze unreadable, but filled with understanding. It was as if he knew exactly what she was going through. He was a part of this world, a part of this life, while she was still just a girl who wasn't ready to embrace it. "It's normal to doubt," he said quietly. "This is a new world for you. But you need to understand one thing, Alice. You can't run from what is bound to your fate. You've already made your choice, and now you must learn to live with it." Alice turned away, unable to meet his piercing gaze. Everything he said was true, but it didn't ease her heart. She wanted to give him an answer, but she couldn't find the right words. "How am I supposed to do this, Leon?" she asked, lifting her eyes to his. "I can't just abandon everything I've ever known." He stepped even closer and gently touched her hand. His warmth seeped into her, but it didn't calm her anxiety. Instead, it made her feel as if her very existence was fracturing. "You don't have to abandon anything," he said. "You can be yourself. You can keep your humanity. But you must understand, this choice wasn't random. You and I, we are one, and you can't change that." Alice took a deep breath, trying to grasp his words. She knew it hurt him to see her uncertainty, that he wanted her to believe in them, in their bond. But her fear was overwhelming. "I'm afraid," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm afraid of losing myself." Leon was silent for a moment, then finally said softly, "You won't lose yourself. You'll be a part of this world, but you'll still be you. You're stronger than you think, Alice. You proved that when you chose to stay." Alice felt something inside her settle. Fear still lingered, but now she saw a path ahead. "I'm ready," she said, her voice filled with new determination. "I'm ready to walk this path with you." Leon smiled, relieved. He knew she had made her choice. And this choice wasn't just a decision. It was the beginning of something new. Chapter 7. Trial by Fire. Several days had passed, and life in Silver Lake had become increasingly difficult for Alice and Leon. The pack did not accept her immediately. Many regarded her with suspicion. They doubted her strength, her determination. But the most dangerous of them all was Caleb, the former alpha, whose ambitions and desires became more evident with each passing day. Alice could feel his gaze on her back. His presence was intrusive, and though he did not display open aggression, she knew Caleb would not leave her alone until he proved she was unworthy of a place in the pack. His opinion carried weight, and his doubts could be deadly. "He will never forgive you for being here," Leon said one day when they met again at the edge of the forest. "Caleb has always been like this. He believes that a human can never be part of the pack. To him, it's an unforgivable mistake." Alice looked at him, her heart pounding at the thought of the looming threat. But she was determined. She knew that if she stayed on the sidelines, she would never be accepted. Yet if she fought, she would face true danger. However, she could not back down now. She had already made her decision. "I'm ready," she said confidently. "I'm ready to face the trial." Leon gazed at her with newfound respect. He knew this moment was crucial. She had to prove her strength, not just to herself, but to everyone around her. The next day, Caleb issued his challenge. He called Alice to battle. This was not just a test of her physical strength, but a trial of her spirit. She had to prove she deserved to be part of the pack, that her place beside Leon was not a mistake. When they met in the forest, the tension was palpable. The entire pack had gathered to witness the duel. Caleb was an experienced fighter, his strength unmatched. Alice's heart pounded in her chest, but she could not retreat. She could not afford to appear weak. "You don't understand, Alice," Caleb said, baring his teeth. "You're just a human. You don't belong in this world." Alice did not respond. Instead, she took the first step, clenched her fists, and prepared for battle. She knew she could not overpower him with sheer force, but her determination and her will to prove herself were her greatest weapons. The fight began. Caleb was fast and strong. He dodged her attacks with ease and struck back with blows that shook the ground. Alice felt her energy draining, but she refused to give up. She focused only on standing her ground, on not losing. She had to prove that her place in the pack was not a mistake. But with every strike, she felt her human limitations. She was not as strong as a wolf. It seemed like victory was slipping away from her grasp. Then, she remembered Leon's words. Her strength was not in her body, but in her spirit. She felt an inner fire ignite. With one final surge of energy, she used her speed and intelligence to knock Caleb off his feet, pinning him down. The pack fell silent. Alice stood over him, breathing heavily, but in her eyes burned the fire of victory. Caleb, lying beneath her, struggled to rise. His gaze was filled with both anger and respect. "You've won," he admitted, his voice tinged with reluctant acknowledgement. Alice held his gaze. She had not only defeated him, she had conquered herself. She had proven her place here, in the pack, beside Leon. As Caleb stepped back, murmurs spread through the pack. The suspicion in their eyes was replaced with recognition. Alice had not only won the battle, she had won their respect. This was not just a fight. This was the moment she became their leader. Leon approached her, and her heart fluttered when he embraced her. "You did it, Alice," he said, pride clear in his voice. She met his gaze, feeling her confidence solidify. In that moment, she realized she was no longer just part of the pack. She was its alpha. Chapter 8. Blood Moon. The night of the full moon came faster than expected. The forest, usually shrouded in a fog of silence, now vibrated with tension. The animals sensed the approach of something great and inevitable. The moon, a massive blood-red disk, hung in the sky like an omen of catastrophe. Alice stood at the edge of the forest, feeling the power of the pack coursing through her veins. But the closer the night drew, the stronger her unease became. She knew that the full moon was not just a moment of power for the wolves. It was a battle for survival, the final line between life and death. Leon stood beside her, his intense gaze never leaving her. But in his eyes, she saw not just concern, but something more, a premonition of the darkness they were about to face. "Tonight, you will protect the pack, Alice," he said, his voice low and serious. "We will fight. You must be ready." Alice nodded. Everything she had learned, everything she had endured, had led to this moment. Tonight, she had to prove to herself and everyone else that she was the true leader. But her heart pounded with worry. She couldn't bear the thought of Leon getting hurt. The pack was prepared, but deep in the shadows of the forest, figures lurked, watching them. Sinister shapes stood among the trees, waiting for their signal. Caleb, though defeated, had not disappeared from their lives. He still thirsted for power, his gaze burning with hatred and revenge. He couldn't allow Alice to remain the leader. And as it turned out, his vengeful plans were already in motion. That night, as the moon turned blood red, they felt the forest tremble with a sinister force. Suddenly, from the darkness, wolves emerged, but these were not ordinary wolves. They were enemies, betrayers of the pack, those who had sworn to destroy them. They followed Caleb, driven by hatred and a thirst for destruction. The battle began, and the forest erupted with the sounds of combat. Wolves growled and leaped, their clashes brutal. Each moment could be their last. Alice felt her power rising with each blow, but this wasn't just a test of physical strength. It was a test of her heart. She had to protect her people, those who stood with her, and prove that she was their leader. Then she saw it. Leon was trapped, surrounded by several hostile wolves. She couldn't let it happen. Fueled by sheer will, she charged forward, breaking through the fights and attacking one of his attackers. Her body moved with astonishing speed and grace, as if she truly belonged to the pack, as if her blood was one with theirs. When she reached Leon, she saw the gratitude in his eyes, but also concern. He was injured but alive. And now it was clear, his life depended on her actions. Time blurred as Alice and Leon fought side by side. She felt her strength growing, as if in response to her determination. In that moment, she realized this had all been part of her journey. In that moment, she became who she was meant to be. She became the leader. When the last enemy fell, silence reclaimed the forest. In the distance, the moon began to fade, its crimson glow vanishing into the cold night. The pack gathered around Alice and Leon. No one spoke, but in their eyes, she saw something new: recognition. Alice surveyed them all, feeling her heart swell with resolve. She had done it. She had proven she could lead, that she could protect those she loved. But this battle was only the beginning. Her future as a leader was just beginning to unfold. Chapter 9. Transformation. The night was quiet, yet an unusual energy lingered in the air. After the bloody battle and the fear that could have destroyed her, Alice felt different. Not like before. Every cell in her body trembled with power, with a newfound understanding of who she was now. But this was only the beginning. That night, the elders of the pack were to conduct the ritual. Leon was beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, as if lending her his confidence. His eyes, full of care and pride, never left her, despite his exhaustion and pain. He knew this ritual would open a new world for Alice, a new path. But it was also a risk. Her soul and body would have to become part of the pack in the deepest sense. Alice knew her life would never be the same. She couldn't refuse. The pack needed protection, but she also had to learn to be part of this great force. In the center of the clearing, under the bright moonlight, stood the elders. Their figures were majestic, like ancient spirits of the forest themselves. They silently observed her, as if she were a being that had yet to fully grasp its power. Their gaze held respect but also seriousness, as if every step and word could change everything. "Come forward, Alice," one of the elders spoke, his voice quiet yet powerful, like the earth itself. "The time has come." With a racing heart, Alice stepped forward. She felt it pounding faster as the elders began to surround her, their bodies merging with the shadows, but their eyes remained vivid and bright. One of the elders raised his hands to the sky, and at that moment, the forest seemed to fall silent. The hush was deafening. The moon shone even brighter, its light sparkling through the leaves like 1,000 tiny sparks. "Accept the power of the pack, Alice," the elder said. "Accept our blood to become one of us." She felt his words seep into her soul, becoming a part of her. Then, one of them lifted a knife, an elegantly forged weapon, and cut his hand. The elder's blood dripped slowly onto the ground, mixing with her own. His energy poured into her body, filling her, transforming her. Alice felt her blood grow hot and turbulent, as if the very earth had begun to pulse through her veins. Every cell in her body shifted, feeling the surge of strength, as if she was becoming something more than human, something wild and powerful, like nature itself. She had become one of them. By transforming her essence, she became the leader. When the elders completed the ritual, Alice stood among them, her eyes glowing with golden light. She felt the power of the pack coursing through her. She was now a true alpha. Her strength was not only physical but internal, deep, and indescribable. She felt like a living embodiment of this force, part of something far greater. Leon approached her, his gaze filled with pride and something deeper. He reached out and gently touched her skin. "You are not just part of the pack, Alice," he whispered. "You have become its soul." Alice felt her heart swell with new strength, but also unease. It was time to change, time to protect those she loved. She was no longer just a young woman exploring the world. She was a leader. She was the alpha, and this was her destiny. The pack accepted her, and she accepted the pack. But a new path lay ahead. Chapter 10: Alpha by Blood. Alice stood among her new brothers and sisters, feeling their eyes on her. Despite everything she had endured, her heart still beat faster with fear. Now, she was the alpha, or at least a contender for the title. But not everyone was ready to accept her. Not everyone agreed with her leadership. Caleb, the former alpha of the pack, stood opposite her, his gaze full of contempt. He was not ready to surrender his position, and fury burned in his eyes. Caleb was strong, experienced, and relentless. He knew that new blood in the pack was a challenge for all, and he did not like the idea that Alice, a human, could claim the role of leader. "You are not ready," he said, his voice like a storm cloud about to break. "You don't know what it means to be an alpha. You weren't born here. Your power is just a temporary illusion." Alice could not allow herself to fall for his words. She felt all the strength the elders had infused into her, but she also understood that, for Caleb, this moment was a trial. He could not simply step aside, especially when it came to his leadership. She was prepared for this. "You're right," she replied, her voice firm and resolute. "I wasn't born here, but now I am part of this world, and I will fight for this place just like all of you. If I must prove my strength, I will." Caleb smirked, but his gaze grew even more intense. He moved toward her slowly, his body exuding a graceful menace, like a wolf sizing up its prey. "Then let's do this. Just remember, you must win to earn respect." Alice knew that fighting Caleb would not be easy. He was older and more experienced than her. But now she was the leader, and she could not afford to show weakness. Her heart pounded harder, her breath grew heavier, but she stood firm in her decision. The dark night enveloped them as Alice and Caleb faced each other. The surrounding wolves formed a circle, their eyes glowing in the darkness. They awaited this moment, their souls alert, ready to support whoever emerged victorious. Caleb lunged first, his movements swift and precise. Like a predator, his hands weapons of battle. Alice dodged, her instincts already guiding her to be as fluid as water, to evade his direct attacks, to use his every move against him. She leaped aside as he struck, feeling the power of her new essence coursing through her body, helping her move faster, stay 2 steps ahead. Every step she took was calculated, every strike aimed at his vulnerabilities. Despite his experience and strength, Caleb had not expected such determination and speed from her. He felt his power gradually waning. Doubt flickered in his eyes. He tried to retreat, but Alice gave him no chance. In the end, she was 1 step ahead, and using all her strength and agility, she delivered the final decisive blow. Caleb collapsed to the ground, his breathing heavy, but he was alive. Alice stood over him, her heart pounding so fiercely she could feel her blood boiling in her veins. She had won, but she had not destroyed him. That was her victory. "You have won," Caleb said, his voice quiet but respectful. He slowly rose. "You are not just strong, but wise. I acknowledge your leadership." Alice met his gaze and saw something she had not expected: respect. He understood that she had not only become strong but worthy. The pack accepted her, and her journey as an alpha had only begun. But now she knew that strength was not only about winning but about preserving humanity and wisdom, even in the face of the harshest trials. Chapter 11. The beginning of a new path. The forest was immersed in moonlight, which seemed almost ghostly. The air was thick with the humidity of the night, and the silence following the fight with Caleb hadn't yet dissipated. The pack had finally accepted Alice, but she knew she still had much to prove. She stood on the cliff, overlooking the endless dark trees below, reflecting on how much her life had changed. Just yesterday, she was an outsider, barely understanding her own strength, and today, she was the leader, burdened with the fate of the entire pack. But the joy of victory was overshadowed by a sense of unease. A soft rustle behind her pulled her from her thoughts. Leon approached, his movements as graceful and nearly soundless as always. "Is something bothering you?" he asked softly, coming to stand beside her. Alice didn't answer right away, her gaze shifting from the night sky to him. "I don't know what lies ahead," she admitted.
"But it feels like this isn't the end."
Leon nodded, crossing his arms over his chest. "The pack has accepted you, but some still doubt. It's natural. Time will solidify your authority." Alice thought for a moment. Yes, the doubts hadn't vanished. Even after her victory over Caleb, she still saw shadows of mistrust in the eyes of some wolves. It wasn't just about holding her position, it was about proving she could lead the pack to survival and prosperity. When they returned to the camp, the atmosphere was tense, though no longer hostile. Wolves sat around the fires, talking amongst themselves. Some looked at Alice with respect, others with caution, but no one challenged her right to lead. The elders were already gathered by the fire. Their gazes were serious, as though they had been waiting for her. "You've proven your strength, Alice." The eldest among them spoke first, a tall wolf with silver fur and piercing eyes. "But being a leader isn't just about fighting. It's about thinking ahead. It's about wisdom. And what's my next step?" she asked, sitting down across from them. The elder sighed and looked around at the others before speaking. "Tonight, we received news. Our enemies have returned." A heavy silence filled the air. "Hunters," Leon said, clenching his fists. As if on cue, the wolves around them stilled, listening intently. They haven't attacked yet, the elder continued, but their scouts have been spotted near our lands. They are watching, waiting. Alice felt a chill run down her spine. She had known this would happen sooner or later, but she hadn't expected it so soon.
How many of them?
She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Unknown for now, one of the advisors answered. But if it's really them, we must prepare for war. Alice's heart began to race. She wasn't just a leader now. She was a protector. We won't wait for them to attack, she said firmly. We'll find out what they want and how dangerous they are. Leon smiled slightly, approving of her response. Then we have a plan. The pack had accepted her, but ahead lay a new challenge. Now Alice would have to prove that she was not just a strong fighter, but a wise leader. And that was far more difficult than defeating Caleb. Chapter 12. The Hunters in the Shadows. The forest was in turmoil. The shadows of the trees seemed especially deep at night, and the air felt heavy with the approaching threat. Alice stood on the cliff, gazing into the distance, toward the place where the safe borders of their territory had once been. Now, every rustle, every drop of dew on the leaves felt like a harbinger of something worse. Her mind wouldn't calm. The news of the hunter scouts made her blood boil. Who were these hunters, and what did they want? Why had they returned? But more than anything, she was concerned with one thing. She was now the leader, and her task wasn't just to protect, but to protect those who had trusted her. In that moment, she realized that her new role was not just a title, it was a responsibility that couldn't be ignored. Leon noticed her unease and approached. He knew how difficult it had been for her to adapt to the role of leader, especially in such troubling times. Alice, you can't keep everything inside, he said, his voice soft but carrying strength. We need to act. I know, she replied, clenching her jaw, but I need to understand what they want. I can't just prepare for a battle without knowing what we're up against. Understanding flickered in his eyes. We can't remain in the dark. We'll send out scouts. That will help us gather information on the hunters' movements and prepare for their potential attack. Alice nodded, but the unease in her heart didn't fade. No matter how much she tried to act rationally, her instincts, her new sense of strength, told her that this threat was far greater than she had imagined. Night fell, and as planned, Alice and Leon gathered a group of the best scouts. The pack was preparing for a possible war, and despite their confidence in their strength, every wolf felt the tension. The scouts, experienced and swift, vanished into the forest, blending into its shadows. But Alice couldn't shake the feeling that behind every tree there was something more than just danger. The hunters weren't ordinary enemies. They were trained, smart, and most importantly, organized. And in their eyes always burned a cold determination. Time dragged on, and the night seemed endless. It was only when the moon reached its peak that the scouts returned. They were tense, their breathing heavy, but they brought news. The hunters are moving toward us, one of them said, his voice low and hoarse. There are many more of them than we thought. It's not just a group. It's an entire clan. We saw their camp to the north. They're preparing for an attack. Alice felt the cold seep into her bones. An entire clan. That meant they had come not just to destroy them, but to end the pack's existence. How many of them? She asked, trying not to reveal her concern. 30, maybe more. Among them are not only hunters, but also engineers, people who know how to set traps and use weapons, the scout answered. They've come with full resolve. Alice understood that to win, they would need more than just strength. They would need strategy. We cannot let them take our land, she said firmly. Prepare the camp. Strengthen the borders. We'll act before they can fully surround us. Leon stepped forward and placed his hand on her shoulder. His presence always gave her confidence, even in the darkest moments. We're with you. The pack is with you. Those words gave Alice the strength she had been lacking. She knew that this was not just a fight for survival. This was the moment that would determine their future. The whole pack prepared for the hunters' assault. They fortified their positions, armed themselves with everything they could find, and braced for the worst. But Alice knew they couldn't give in to fear. She was the leader now, and she couldn't allow herself to be weak. The night was calm, but every wolf sitting by the fire knew that the upcoming battle would be decisive. Alice spent the last hours before the attack in deep thought, reviewing strategies and preparing her pack. But despite all her efforts, her heart remained restless. The hunters were too strong, and though she was ready for any fight, she didn't want to lose a single member of her pack. But now, with everything ready, Alice knew that there could be no retreat. This was their moment, and she was going to fight for everyone who stood beside her. Chapter 13. The Final Battle. When the hunters approached the edge of the pack's territory, the sky was covered with clouds. It seemed as though nature itself was preparing for the decisive moment. The moon, hidden behind the clouds, cast only a dim light on the earth, leaving everything in darkness. At the edge of the forest stood the pack's warriors, ready for battle. Alice was at the forefront, her eyes filled with determination, but also the weight of the realization that ahead of them lay not just a fight for survival, but a trial that could be fatal for them all. Leon approached her, his face serious, but in his eyes burned a fire. Not the fire of rage, but the one that comes from inner confidence. He knew Alice could handle it. He knew she was ready to lead them into battle. "We're ready," he said, his voice firm as stone. "But remember, this is not just a fight. This is our destiny. We either win or we fall." Alice nodded, feeling her heart beat in sync with his words. She knew that this moment could be their end, but it could also be their new strength, their new beginning. This was their trial, and they could not retreat. Ahead, in the shadow of the trees, she saw their enemies. Dark silhouettes of the hunters, their faces hidden, but their presence was palpable. They were not just a group of killers. This was a clan whose hunting instincts had been honed by years of fighting and survival. They had not come in peace, and they were not going to retreat. Alice scanned her people. Each of them was ready, but inside them too, there was unease. 30 hunters against a small but determined pack. Even with an advantage in skills and physical strength, they were too few. And though Alice believed in her strength, not everything depended on her. "We will fight to the last," she said, her voice firm and confident despite the fear that still crept into her soul. "But remember, we are not just a pack. We are family." Alice's words rang out like a signal for the attack. The leader among the hunters, a man with a clan tattoo on his arm, raised his sword, and they rushed forward into the darkness of the forest, like wolves pouncing on their prey. The first strike was lightning fast. The hunters advanced with incredible speed, and the pack responded just as decisively. Alice lunged forward, her body moving as one with the forest. She felt her new powers fill every movement, but she also realized that it was not enough. They needed more. The battle began in chaos, but Alice felt her instincts surge. She saw the hunters attacking her people, their traps set along the path, and it threw off her strategy. Traps were weapons they had no defense against. One of her leaders had already fallen, caught in a net, and his screams echoed through the forest. It was the first serious blow to the morale of the pack. Alice turned away, her heart racing. She saw one of the hunters with a bow aiming at Leon. He was perched on high, his face hidden in shadow, and she realized he was in danger. In the blink of an eye, she surged forward, cutting through the crowd of enemies. She leapt, her claws extended, and struck the hunter straight in the heart. But when she looked back, she saw an even greater threat. The leader of the hunter clan stood right before her, his eyes full of fury and determination. He was a man who would not surrender. He was stronger than any of her people. "You want to feed us," he said, his voice low and thunderous, like the rumble of thunder. "We're hunters. We will consume your pack, as fire consumes wood." Alice didn't answer him. She simply stepped back, preparing to meet him in battle. Her breath was heavy, but she knew this was her chance. She was ready to face him head-on, and she used all her strength to strike faster and more precisely. And then, in the climactic moment, when it seemed everything had been decided, Alice lunged at the enemy leader with incredible speed. The leader of the hunter clan tried to defend himself, but he was too slow. The power she had accumulated over these months filled her strike, and she took him down, clearing the way for her pack. When the leader fell to the ground, his people froze. They understood the battle was already lost. But they didn't surrender immediately. They still tried to resist, but the pack was now at its peak strength. Alice stood on the battlefield, surrounded by her people, her breath heavy, but she felt her inner strength growing. "This is our land, and we won't let you take it," she said, looking at the remaining hunters. They began to retreat, understanding that they had lost their leader and could not win. As they disappeared into the darkness, Alice felt her body weaken, and the tension eased. But the victory was theirs. The pack had proven its strength. Leon approached her, his face full of pride and recognition. "You did it, Alice," he said, his voice warm. "We survived." Alice smiled weakly. She stood among her people, and though she was exhausted, she knew that this battle had brought not just victory, but the confidence that they had withstood. The pack was stronger than ever, and their journey was just beginning. Chapter 14. Eternal Love. After long months of fighting, fear, and blood, when the last echoes of the battle faded and the fog from the forest lifted, Alice and Leon stood on the top of a cliff, looking at the world they had saved. The forest before them was dark and calm, the sky a deep blue with a faint golden glow from the setting sun. This moment was theirs. This world was theirs. And now, after everything they had gone through, nothing could destroy their bond. Alice, her hair blowing in the wind, was quieter than usual. In her eyes, there was no fear, only clarity and understanding that their journey wasn't over. But in this silence, she felt her heart fill with something new, something that could only be measured by her love for Leon. Leon stood beside her, his gaze full of tenderness and pride in her. But even though they had gone through so much, their hearts never stopped seeking each other. They had found in each other the strength that hadn't failed them in battles and in battles with themselves. "We did it," Alice said, her voice quiet but with the depth of all her feelings. "We really did." Leon turned to her, his eyes full of softness and warmth, looking deep into her soul. He slowly reached out and touched her face, his fingers gently gliding along her cheek. "Yes, we won," he said, but in his voice, there was not just joy from victory. There was something more. But the victory is just the beginning. Your strength, your wisdom, your soul. You have become a part of me. You have become a part of this world, and I will always be by your side. Alice closed her eyes, feeling his words penetrate her soul, becoming a part of her. Their bond was deeper than just love. It was something that couldn't be explained by words. They had survived what no one else would have in life. But they were bound not just by battle and suffering. It was love, which had begun in the darkest corners of their lives and blossomed, like a flower in the desert, strong and beautiful. "I can't imagine my life without you, Leon," she said, opening her eyes and looking at him with such tenderness that her gaze seemed endless. "You're not just my partner. You are my soul. You are the one who showed me that love can be a force capable of overcoming any obstacles." Leon smiled, but in his eyes was such sincerity that it made Alice's heart race. He leaned in and kissed her, not as during the war or in moments of fear, but as if this kiss was given for eternity, as a promise that their hearts would always beat in unison. When they pulled away from each other, their gazes met, and no words were needed. Everything was clear. This moment was eternal. It was what they fought for, what was worth everything. "Well, handle this world," Leon whispered, his voice full of warmth and confidence. "Because it'll always be by your side. Well, face any storm together." Alice sighed, feeling her heart fill with peace and serenity. In this world, full of dangers and dark corners, she had found not just strength, but love. They were each other's haven, a home in a world that could be so cruel. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said, smiling. "You're here, and I know that together we'll overcome everything." Leon took her hand, and together they began to descend the cliff. In their eyes was light, in their hearts was love, and ahead of them was a world where they were now together. With every step, Alice felt that she had become a part of something larger than just a pack. She had become a part of a great love that was her guiding star, her strength, and her future. Thus began their new life, a life without fear, without loneliness. Everything before them was a future full of love, strength, and endless horizons. And despite having gone through so much, each of them knew that this love was eternal.